In any life, we have highs and lows, light and dark, wins and losses. What happens when we encounter that moment in time when what happens next could change everything? Join us as we step into another person's inspirational moment and see how we can connect their experience to ours. This is Greg Stevens, and you're listening to A Shot of Inspiration. Welcome to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. My guest today is a very good friend of mine named Enidio Magel. Now, this episode may go a bit long because Enidio is one of the most inspirational and interesting people I've met in my lifetime. And I met Enidio probably in 2003. We worked on a project together. I brought Enidio in on a big leadership program that we started working with. I met him through Chris Douglas, who you've seen earlier. And Chris and Enidio both, I think, did the spiritual psychology work in San Diego. And he'll talk a bit about that. But Enidio has an amazing life story, and I want you to hear all of it. And also, Enidio currently does work in diversity, equity, and inclusion with a lot of different companies around the world, actually. And I'll let him tell a little about his career, what he's doing, but I want to dive into his entire life, where he came from, how he got to the United States, and how his life has just kind of unfolded into the amazing life it's been. So, Enidio, thank you for being on today. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and tell guests a little about yourself, what you do now, and then let's just kind of see where it goes organically.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation. And I don't think I've really thought of my life as inspirational, so I want to just start off um, with a thank you about looking at it from that perspective. Because as I've gone through my life, I've just thought, this is what people do, and until someone points it out, that you become aware of maybe that is a different road that I've traveled, equally as valid as other roads, but. So I appreciate the opportunity and our friendship, by the way.
Absolutely.
Um,
Thank you.
so I do diversity, equity, and inclusion. It has evolved from EEO conversation back in the early '90s to belonging and understanding really more about the equity part of what work life can provide people. And most of the conversations that I hold is giving people an opportunity to turn the flashlights on themselves, turn the flashlights on their organization, their teams, and really ask themselves if we really truly are aspiring for belonging and inclusion, then how are we doing? And so that question is just more of a ponder question for people to recognize what is it that they do that currently helps people achieve their maximum potential, and then what are some other things that may be well intended but limit people from having full access to the support and their voice being heard. So really, I fly around the world with a bunch of markers and chart paper, and I just put it up and go, let's talk about this as a ponder question. And that's really how a lot of the sessions that I have facilitated, obviously with some framework in mind, but to your point earlier, organic, and the way in which people develop the conversation is where I'm now living as a facilitator.
Yeah. Well, also, Enidio is a great speaker. Actually, he officiated his first wedding a couple months ago for a friend of ours. And I have to say, folks, I'm a minister's kid. I've been to hundreds of weddings, been in a lot myself, even officiated. Enidio, you did the best job I have ever seen an officiator do in a wedding. He reached out and touched you. And I know the way he speaks, it's really authentic. And that's what I love about so many people are resistant around the diversity, equity, inclusion conversation because they feel they don't need it. There's a sense of shame. There's a reaction to it. And one of the things I've learned is we can't learn anything new until we lean into those hard conversations.
Yes.
And what I also get is it's not a shaming piece about what you do. It's something about let's discover. It's that organic opening up. Tell me and I think a lot of your ability to do that came from your life story. So what I'd like to do to kind of guide the audience where you came from and why you're probably so good at what you do,
Mhm.
is your life. So walk us through where you started out, and just kind of walk us through, and I'm going to engage with you and ask questions along the way. But where were you born? Where'd you start off, and when?
So this is an interesting piece of starting the conversation because my birth certificate says Havana, Cuba, but the real place that I was born was in a little town right outside of Santa Clara, and my mom, dad, and my grandfather were at a circus, and my grandfather had a heart attack at the circus, and so off they rushed my mom, who was pregnant with me, and the same hospital bed that my grandfather died, I was born. And so it was one of those moments where you just don't know where you're going to start life. And even though my birth certificate says Havana, I think that, a lot of folks at that time, they're very much into impressions. If you live in a bigger town versus a little farm town, that could give you some advantages. And so that was the beginning of it. That was the beginning of my life, is death and birth simultaneously. And I then grew up in Havana. And since, birth to 9, I was in Cuba until I was asked to be the first one out of my family to get on an airplane and leave the country under a student visa. And so that's what I did. That's
So
what I did.
you all by yourself.
By myself, I was 9 years old. I was about to turn 10. And you asked me to consider some questions that we were going to speak about, and one of them was this moment of an influential moment that has really set the direction for your life. And for me, that was one of those. I've had plenty. In fact, I had one this morning as I was taking my walk down Congress Avenue early in the morning. There was a person who was living in the streets waking up as I was walking by, and I said good morning, and he looked at me with a smile in his face and said good morning back. And for me, that was such an inspiration to consider that that person could smile at me. And it was such a transformational way of understanding, what issues do I really have? Why don't I smile more often? And so, inspiration for me almost comes daily, but to be more specific as a life event, then I would say that trip was a life event for me. Yeah.
Well, I remember you telling me one time that that's one of the reasons you were interested in flight industry.
Yes.
Tell about that. Why?
Yes. Yes.
You were 9 years old. You're
Nine
on this
years old.
plane, and all these flight attendants are like paying
That's right.
attention to you.
That's right. That's right. And you talk about seeing life in from black and white to full color in a matter of an instant. That was one of those times in which inspiration for me comes in surprises. And if I was so surprised that life was so different than what I had experienced the first 9 years of my life, that it just opened up. It's like cleaning your glasses after they've been foggy. You see just elements of life that I had never seen before. My routine, growing up in Cuba was very sheltered. And because we had declared the intent to leave and we were non-communist, we immediately got marked as a family. There were placards on the door that says, this none of your contents belong to you. On my walk to school, which was a short walk, but most of the kids wore the red bandana, meaning that they were part of the Communist Party, and I was one of maybe two that didn't wear the red bandana. And so the walk to school was just a gauntlet of harassment, being told that I was a worm, that my family was no good, and that was the first 9 years of my life where I endured. I don't even know if enduring is part of what I was thinking back then, but I was given access to some emotions and feelings that I didn't experience inside of my home. Inside of my home was, you're beautiful, you're talented, you can achieve anything. And then the moment that I walked down 23 steps, the other side of the emotional cleansing, I think, was being shown for me. So I ran in and out of school. I never went out. I was never really a kid that had a bunch of toys or anything like that, just because we were limited by the choices that my family had made. So take that scenario, almost a daily. And by the way, unfortunately in Cuba, we went to school Monday through Saturday. So I had to endure it, 6 days out of the week. The moment I sat down on that airplane, the moment that I started to recognize that life had love and joy, and that it wasn't given by my family, that it was the true strangers that actually saw me as a valuable individual. And one of them was, Pan Am Airlines. I still have the little set of wings that the flight attendants gave me. They took me back in the galley, and they just doted over me on that flight to Madrid. And I was surprised that these were not false comments that people were giving me. I was surprised that people were genuinely happy to see me. And all of that gave me an awareness early on of not belonging to belonging. And it was early on. And that then set my trajectory to recreate those experiences of belonging for other people, because it felt so good. And it also felt like it was for me, not for anyone else. It was truly very much a personal way that people were expressing their love. In this, maybe if I wasn't a 9-year-old, 10-year-old child, I'm not sure, but just behaviors that I had never experienced before, comments that I had never heard before. Imagine being on a 707 airplane for the first time, going to another place. It was Disneyland coming to me early on, after those horrific experiences that I had as a child.
Well, it also must have been a wide range of emotions because your family's not there with you. And you probably don't know what the next step is. I mean, I don't know. I know that you get off the plane. That was that moment that we went from black and white to color, or you got that cold drink after walking through the
Yes,
desert.
yes,
Uh,
yes,
but
yes.
walk us through what happened when you got to Madrid. I mean, where did you live? Was anyone there to greet you? What happened?
So, going back to your first question about um, the seesaw of emotions, having that kind of Disneyland experience, and then recognizing that I may not be seeing my parents and sisters for a very long period of time. But here's a truth: the joy of being loved sweeps you to such a point where all the other things that I would have factored in, not having a family, not having, resources, became secondary. And so I was really propelled by love. As silly as that might sound, everything else just kind of disappeared. And the most attractive part, and the thing that sustained me during that period of time, was just the kindness of a stranger. And so for me, hospitality is when you love a stranger. And that's what I was experiencing more often than thinking about my family. But my instructions were simple. When you get to Madrid, just, first person you see, you declare asylum, and you kind of take it from there. And I think I saw a baggage handler or whoever opened the door. I was like, I'm here to declare asylum. So it's like, what am I going to do with this kid? And so just, I wasn't the only one that was going through that process during that period of time. So they were accustomed to seeing immigrants, but very few kids. Yeah, there was an effort called the Peter Pan effort to get a lot of kids into Catholic homes way before I immigrated, but I bypassed that. My father and I overlapped at some point, but he was on his own trajectory. I was on my own trajectory. My sister and my two sisters and mom stayed behind in Cuba. And when I got there, there was a lot of support, a lot of Cubans who had done what I was doing earlier, and so they kind of ushered me through the process of finding a home. And this home that I ended up was a milk dairy. And the woman that ran the milk dairy, it was on the first level of the store. She had 3 floors up where some other immigrants were there. And I happened to be one of those. Being a child, Maria took me in, she had that mother instinct, and she just took me in, and I would go down and work with her in the milk dairy, and just kind of, first time that I ever had chocolate yogurt. I had no idea that yogurt comes in different flavors. And so there was that element of surprise. There was that element of inspiration about life has so many little gifts that you can discover that kind of made me feel like everything was going to be okay, even though mom, dad, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandparents, may not be part of my future.
Well, what I hear you really saying is you focused on what you did have and not what you didn't have in the moment.
And it wasn't me, because I didn't think I had the brain power to recognize that it was mainly being pulled for me to look at. And so I really didn't do anything but just set the world free and allow that freedom to kind of bring up the motivation that I needed in order to sustain the pain that I wasn't even aware of that was happening. It showed up later, though. In my 30s, I became, like a 10-year-old, and thank goodness for my wife. She recognized that I was just going through that kid stage that I didn't have back then.
So how long were you in Madrid?
So I was in Madrid, and I was trying to think, because it was all such a blur. I was in
Especially at
Madrid
9.
probably about 3 months, 4 months.
Okay. Okay.
And then I was given entry to the US because I became a hardship case, a child without parents by themselves. And so it kind of gave me a certain priority in being given a visa to immigrate. And so I went from Cuba to Madrid, Portugal, New York, Dallas. And in Dallas, there was a Cuban family that had no children, but you talk about love. These two couple just wanted to be of service. And one way that they were of service was to, bring in people into their homes. And they were childless. And they've always had this desire to be parents. And so I became their surrogate. And funny part, I'm jumping a little bit, but as you're asking me these questions, I'm reminded of the experience. Years later, like fast forward the tape, I was already in aviation and all that. I got based out of Dallas, and I went back and lived with them as an adult, and I had my room, and everything was just like, it was when I was a 10-year-old.
Crashing on their couch.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes. And so then that started the whole process of me then, as a result of the privilege that I was given to be the first one to show up in the US. I then went to Mexico and got visas for my parents. I remember flying into the consulate in Mexico City. When I got to the Mexico City consulate, there was a movie star there her name was Olga Guillot, and she was a very famous singer. But she too was at the embassy frequently in order to shepherd people through. And so when I showed up, she picked me up, literally sat me on the consular's desk and said to me, "Honey, tell them what you need." And so I said, "I just want my parents out." And so immediately I got the visas for my mom and sisters to go to Mexico. And they went to Mexico and were there for a year, living in a convent. And my dad then did the same trajectory, going through Europe, etc. And here we landed in Austin, Texas 5 years later.
Now, did everyone land back in Austin?
Yes, at different times.
At different times.
At different times. So after I I had gone through what I just described to you. My grandparents had already made their way out as well, and so they ended up in Austin, Texas. I started living with my grandparents until people just started showing up. It was like, who's going to come today?
Well,
But it was
also, I got to throw this in there because the listeners are going to love this. If you're anywhere in Austin and you know the original Kirby Lane,
yeah.
Enidio lived in the actual house that Kirby Lane is located. Is that correct?
That's right. And you're probably eating in my bedroom or my parents' bedrooms. You just didn't know it. There are times in which I just take the waiter's hand along and say, let me show you something that I know you would never know is here. And it's like my initials carved on a certain part of the home or something like that.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you landed in Austin?
So I left Cuba when I was 9. I had my birthday while I was away, and I was 10 years old.
Oh, so all that happened in that amount of time where you went to Madrid, you went to Dallas, you
Yeah,
went to Mexico City, all that within a year.
within a year. Yeah,
Wow. Okay. That's a
it was.
lot for a 9 to 10-year-old.
That's a lot of Disneyland, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And
Yeah.
so you, I guess at that point you enrolled school here in Austin, and then I guess
Yeah,
you just stayed in Austin the entire time. Is that correct?
yeah. Burnett Junior High, and my 6th grade teacher changed my name from Enidio to Sam, and I was Sam for 6 years of my life.
I never knew
And
that.
it was like, what is happening? But I'm going along with it because so far it had turned out to my advantage for sure.
Well, when did you change it back?
So I changed it back much later. Like I still Burnett Junior High, then went to Lanier High School, and some of those kids that I was in Burnett Junior High with transitioned with me to Lanier, so they knew me as Sam. And I remember winning a contest that was like a Young Texan Award that they were, offering, and I was, one of the winners for Texas. And they had a little clip of me holding my award and said, Sam Magel wins award. And I had kept the clipping. And years later, my 9-year-old daughter, Missy, she was looking through the scrapbook. She goes, who is this? Who's Sam Magel? It was like, oh my gosh, that was something that I didn't realize that it had become my identity, but others who never knew that story was confused as to who are you? And I'm still looking for that answer, quite honestly, but it just keeps reveal itself. And I kept it till about my senior when I went to college. I started using Enidio. It's still my pizza ordering name. It's so easy to say, Sam, then Enidio, and spell it 7 times, so I use it every once in a while, but it's my choice when I use it now, which is a big difference versus being given that as the choice.
Being told who you are. Enidio, thank you so much for being on today, and we will do this again. I appreciate you opening up about your personal stories and giving people a glimpse into who you are, because folks, this is one of the most amazing people I know, and thank you for being on the show. And folks, we'll see you again on another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye, Greg.
Thank you for listening. This ends part 1 of this 2-part interview. Hear the rest of this story in our next episode.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.